Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, and this presentation sets out to examine the point at which Weimar democracy no longer continued to work. Now, what you have to bear in mind with Weimar democracy when we get to the 1930s is the conditions, and that is the Great Depression, have allowed three forces to converge to make the Reichstag unworkable. Three forces that had never accepted the Republic, nor Weimar democracy. The traditional elite, the Communist Party, and now, as we reach the 1930s, the Nazi Party too. The Nazis had no interest in helping the Republic, nor in making democracy work. Nazi Party delegates and the Communists were only interested in showing their contempt for the Reichstag and obstructed its work every way they could. The only way a majority could be achieved was with a vote against. Nothing positive could get passed, hence the increase in presidential decrees. And when changes to the parliamentary rules were imposed in February 1931, making it more difficult to block its work, the parties of both the extreme right and the extreme left walked out, and the Reichstag was adjourned for 6 months. A measure of how it ceased to be a legitimate constitutional body can be shown in the decreasing number of days it sat. Between 1920 and 1930, the Reichstag sat, on average, 100 days a year. Now, as a comparison, the British Parliament sits on average about 150 days a year. Between October 1930 and March 1931, it maintained its average, sitting on 50 days. But after that, it only met a further 24 times up to July 1932, when there were elections, and only 3 more times between then and February 1933. It's a similar picture when we look at the increase in presidential decrees. In 1930, Hindenburg issued just 5 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed 98 laws. In 1931, he issued 44 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed 34 laws. In 1932, he issued 66 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed just 5 laws. The check on the power of the executive, that's the government, was simply no longer a feature of the Republic. Power resided entirely in the small circle around the ageing Hindenburg, and his power to appoint governments and make decrees. And General Kurt von Schleicher, the army's political voice, now entered that circle. His aim, like almost all the establishment, was to bring about the return of an authoritarian regime, and he saw in the Nazis the means by which this might be legitimized. When Brüning was forced out at the end of May 1932, Hitler had already met with Schleicher and others close to the president. Franz von Papen, a landed aristocrat, took over as Chancellor, on the recommendation of Schleicher as someone sympathetic to the army. Now, Brüning's cabinet had been known as the Cabinet of Experts. Von Papen's was known as the Cabinet of Barons. His aim, and that of Schleicher's, was to win over the Nazis in order to gain mass support for an authoritarian, anti-democratic regime. He called new elections for the Reichstag, which were set for the end of July 1932, and he lifted the ban on the SA, Schleicher was still hoping to recruit them as an auxiliary force in the army. And when street violence increased, Papen took over direct control of the Prussian state government on the grounds that it couldn't ensure law and order. Military rule was duly imposed on Berlin, in the process setting a fateful precedent. That it didn't result in civil war was more to do with the Social Democrats' deep commitment to the principles of the rule of law than anything else. But that Prussia accounted for more than half Germany's territory and had a population bigger than France, this would turn out to be a crushing blow for democracy. It destroyed the federal principle. In so doing, opened the door to the complete centralization of power. It seemed to most that there were only two directions Germany could now go: a conservative, authoritarian government backed by the army, or a Nazi government. And the results of the July 1932 election seemed to confirm this. The rejection of moderate democratic centrist parties and support for extremist parties that showed itself in the 1930 election and again in the recent state elections, and it seemed to be holding firm. What's more, and what was highly significant, was that the bourgeoisie in 1932 had virtually given their vote to the Nazis en bloc. And so I'll end this presentation. If Weimar democracy is not dead, then its pulse is barely readable. Circumstance has brought it to this point, the Great Depression. But so too has its constitution, which gave the president dictatorial powers in times of emergency. And so too have the manoeuvrings of the communists, the Nazis, and the traditional elite, who are actually the ones in control of what is unfolding. I'll look at the Nazis' perspective in a separate video, and you'll see that history could have gone down a different path. Now, before I close, don't forget I have more detailed notes, and if you would like them, just drop me a line at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and I'll pass them on to you. And as I always say, do not worry about being pestered by me. You won't be. Honestly, even if I had the inclination, I certainly haven't the time. Anyway, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.